The world knows him as Hollywood's eternal gentleman, the silver-haired star who seemed untouched by time. But at 64, George Clooney carries a weight no camera can capture. Beneath the polished smile and velvet tuxedos lies a man confronting a truth far more relentless than fading fame: the tragedy of what remains when the lights dim, when roles grow fewer, and when the mirror begins to whisper what the audience refuses to see. He has been the doctor who saved lives on primetime television, the thief who charmed his way into vaults and hearts, the director who dared to question America's conscience. Yet behind the applause, Clooney is not simply a star growing older. He is an artist haunted by purpose, a husband balancing devotion, a father watching time sprint ahead, and a man who knows the roles he once embodied so effortlessly are slipping further out of reach. This is the story not of George Clooney's fame, but of his heartbreak, the tragedy of a man whose charm was his armor and whose twilight years reveal the fragility behind the myth. Early years and childhood struggles. Long before the world knew him as Hollywood's most eligible bachelor, George Timothy Clooney was simply a boy in Kentucky, the son of a newsman and a beauty queen, growing up in a household where charisma was currency. His father, Nick Clooney, commanded local television screens with a natural authority, while his aunt, Rosemary Clooney, sang her way into the nation's living rooms with a voice that defined an era. In the shadow of that glamour, young George absorbed two lessons early: the power of presence and the cost of public life. But even destiny had its delays. At 14, Clooney awoke one morning to a face he no longer recognized. A sudden case of Bell's palsy had paralyzed half of it. For months, he could not smile, could not blink, could not laugh without the other children mocking him. Cruel nicknames followed him through the hallways, forcing him to retreat inward, searching for protection and humor. It was then that George learned how to turn pain into wit, humiliation into self-defense. The boy who could not move half his face taught himself how to command a room with words, timing, and charm. The illness healed, but the memory remained. In many ways, that paralysis never truly left him. It became a ghost that lingered in every performance. Every smile flashed on red carpets. Every joke cracked at his own expense. To the world, Clooney would one day be the confident movie star who seemed untouchable. But underneath, he was still the boy who once had to fight to prove that he was more than his reflection in the mirror. That wound, invisible yet ever-present, shaped the man who would later conquer Hollywood. It gave him resilience, but also a shadow, the knowledge that everything could change overnight. And it was that shadow, carried from childhood, that would eventually resurface in ways far more devastating as the years went on. The rise to stardom, ER, and early fame. For years, George Clooney drifted through the backlots of Hollywood with little more than persistence and a charming grin. He was the guest star who appeared in forgotten sitcoms, the background player in television dramas, the young man waiting for his moment in an industry that so often swallowed dreams whole. Casting directors admired his presence, but his career seemed destined for near misses, until the mid-1990s when opportunity finally arrived in the form of a hospital drama on NBC. In 1994, the world met Dr. Doug Ross. The roguishly handsome pediatrician on ER. Clooney's portrayal was electric, a mix of rebellious charm and tender vulnerability that made audiences swoon. Overnight, he became America's heartthrob, his face plastered on magazine covers, his smoldering gaze melting television screens across the globe. But while fans saw effortless charisma, Clooney felt the pressure of a man carrying years of rejection on his back. He knew this was his shot, and he would not squander it. On set, he studied, refined, and transformed himself into more than just a television actor. He was preparing for the silver screen, and when Hollywood came calling, he was ready. Soon came roles in From Dusk Till Dawn, Out of Sight, and Three Kings, films that showcased not only his good looks but his ability to shift between genres: action, romance, drama, even dark comedy. By the late 1990s, George Clooney was no longer just the man in Scrubs. He was a bona fide movie star. Yet stardom brought its own chains. With every new role, Clooney found himself wrestling with the expectations of being Hollywood's leading man. He was charming, yes, handsome, undeniably, but he feared being typecast. trapped in a cycle of suave characters that masked the depth he longed to explore. Even as the paychecks grew larger and the premieres more dazzling, a quiet question lingered in his mind. Was this enough? Behind the glow of fame, Clooney carried the same restlessness that had driven him through obscurity. Success had opened doors, but it had also set a stage for something more demanding, proving that he was more than just a face on a poster. That hunger would define the next chapter of his life, where Clooney would take the greatest risk of his career, stepping not in front of the camera, but behind it. Artistic evolution, directing, activism, and Hollywood's conscience. By the early 2000s, George Clooney had everything Hollywood promised: stardom, wealth, and the adoration of millions. But those who knew him best could sense his unease. The man who had once fought so desperately to be noticed now feared the emptiness of being noticed only for his looks. Clooney wanted more than applause. He wanted purpose. That purpose found him behind the camera. In 2002, he directed Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, an unusual film that revealed his appetite for risk. But it was his 2005 film Good Night and Good Luck that redefined him entirely. Stripped of Hollywood gloss, the black-and-white political drama about journalist Edward R. Murrow's battle against Senator Joseph McCarthy was a revelation. Critics hailed Clooney not just as a star, but as an auteur, a man willing to challenge the system that had made him. The film earned 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. Clooney had crossed the threshold from celebrity to cultural figure. He was no longer simply a man gracing movie posters. He was shaping conversations about truth, power, and justice. Off-screen, Clooney's conscience extended into activism. He spoke out against atrocities in Darfur, raised awareness about global crises, and used his platform not only to entertain, but to advocate. For a time, he seemed almost untouchable, proof that Hollywood could produce a leading man with both a heart and a voice. And yet, beneath the accolades, a personal shadow still lingered. Clooney himself once admitted that acting never came easily to him, that he worked not from the range of a chameleon, but from the force of personality. He could move an audience, yes, but he felt limited, bound to what he once described as going from A to B. That self-awareness, coupled with the inevitability of age, gnawed at him quietly, even in moments of triumph. For a man who had climbed so high, the question became inescapable. How much further could he go before gravity pulled him back down? The answer would come not on a film set in Hollywood, but under the bright, unyielding lights of Broadway, where Clooney, at 64, would make one of his boldest choices, only to discover that success in art could not silence the tragedy of time. Broadway debut, triumph shadowed by midlife doubt. At 64, George Clooney chose to do something many actors of his stature would avoid. He stepped away from the comfort of cameras and movie sets and walked directly into the merciless glare of Broadway. Unlike film, there would be no second take, no carefully edited cut, no forgiving lens. On stage, the truth is laid bare. Every line, every breath, every moment of hesitation exposed to an audience sitting just feet away. Clooney made his Broadway debut in a stage adaptation of Good Night and Good Luck, reprising the story that had cemented his reputation as a serious filmmaker nearly 2 decades earlier. This time, he was not behind the camera. He was in the spotlight, embodying Edward R. Murrow himself. It was a daring choice, almost poetic. A man once celebrated for his effortless Hollywood allure, now confronting history's most unyielding truth-teller. Audiences roared their approval. Reviews hailed his presence as commanding, his performance as magnetic. On opening night, he stepped out into the New York night with his wife, Amal, by his side, and the city seemed to bow at his feet. To the outside world, Clooney had conquered yet another arena, proving once more that his talents stretched beyond the silver screen. But beneath the cheers, a quieter, more fragile story unfolded. Clooney himself confessed to feeling the weight of age pressing against him. His famously silver hair, once a symbol of timeless sophistication, had been dyed dark for the role, a transformation he half-jokingly referred to as a horrible midlife crisis. The humor was self-deprecating, but the undertone was real. In altering his appearance for the stage, Clooney revealed the insecurities that so many men face in their 60s, the slow unraveling of the image they once wore so effortlessly. He had always been the man who seemed ageless, the star whose wrinkles only deepened his allure. But under Broadway's lights, stripped of cinematic illusions, Clooney stood as what he was, a man confronting the passing of time in front of thousands. The applause could not erase that truth, nor could it silence the voice inside him, the one asking how many more times he would feel this rush, how many more stages he would walk before the curtain fell for good. For Clooney, Broadway was both a triumph and a revelation. He had proven that he could still captivate, but the victory carried a bittersweet edge, a reminder that even for Hollywood's eternal gentleman, time is the one role he cannot outshine. The crossroads, legacy, mortality, and diminishing roles. By the time he reached 64, George Clooney was no longer the fresh-faced doctor from ER or the slick con artist of Ocean's 11. He had become something rarer, a Hollywood statesman, a figure admired not only for his talent, but for his grace. Yet with that dignity came the silent burden of fading options. In a world obsessed with youth, the roles for men like Clooney grew fewer each year. He was still cast as leading men, yes, but the characters no longer danced with the same reckless energy. Scripts now brought him fathers, mentors, aging icons, reflections of the life he was actually living. To the public, this was natural. To Clooney, it was a reminder that he had crossed the invisible threshold all actors fear, the point where Hollywood stops asking, "What can you become?" and instead whispers, "What have you already been?" He once admitted, candidly, that he never saw himself as a great actor. Unlike the Daniel Day-Lewises of the world, Clooney described his own craft as limited, moving, as he put it, from A to B. For decades, charisma filled the gaps, masking the insecurities. But as the years advanced, the charm began to feel less like a gift and more like a mask he could not remove. At home, Clooney was grounded by the love of his wife, Amal, and the laughter of their children. To outsiders, this was the happy ending, the movie star who finally found stability and family. But even in this comfort, the question of legacy weighed heavily. Would history remember him as the matinee idol of his generation, or as the artist who dared to challenge conventions? Would his activism outlast his films? Would his children grow up knowing him as a father who had truly lived in the moment, or as a man forever distracted by the fading applause of strangers? For Clooney, the tragedy was not in losing fame. He had more than enough of that. The tragedy was in knowing that no matter how high he climbed, time itself was the one mountain he could never conquer. Each new role, each new project was not just an artistic pursuit, but a race against the inevitable. And at 64, the finish line suddenly felt much closer than it once had. Reveals, the hair, the humor, and the quiet desperation. George Clooney has always been a master of charm. For decades, his humor disarmed critics, soothed interviewers, and kept fans laughing. But by 64, the jokes had begun to carry an edge. Not simply humor for humor's sake, but a shield against the creeping reality of age. The most telling moment came with something seemingly trivial: his hair. For Broadway's Good Night and Good Luck, Clooney dyed his famously silver locks a dark brown, a transformation he described as a horrible midlife crisis. Audiences chuckled, tabloids had their fun, and Clooney himself leaned into the ridicule. But beneath the laugh was a sobering truth. For a man who had become a cultural icon precisely because he aged gracefully, altering that image betrayed the quiet desperation of someone grappling with impermanence. He joked about his limitations too, saying there were things he just couldn't do anymore. To the casual listener, it was a witty acknowledgement of aging. To those who listened closer, it was a confession, an admission that his once boundless charisma could no longer mask the weight he carried. Clooney's humor had always been his armor, but at 64, even the armor was beginning to crack. On stage, he could still command a room. On red carpets, his smile still drew flashes from photographers. But late at night, in unguarded moments, he knew the applause could not drown out the ticking of time. He was a man who had once seemed larger than life, now reduced, like all of us eventually are, to the fragility of being human. That is the heartbreak of Clooney. at 64, that the world still sees him as untouchable, while inside he carries the same fears, doubts, and insecurities of the boy who once stared into the mirror with half his face paralyzed. The mask has always been flawless, but now the cracks are beginning to show. Flashbacks. The boy, the doctor, the director. Time has a way of circling back, folding old chapters into new ones. For George Clooney, the echoes of his past resound more loudly now than ever. At 64, with each new role and each quiet moment off stage, fragments of his life return to him like scenes from a film that refuses to end. He remembers the boy in Kentucky, stricken by Bell's palsy, his face frozen while classmates mocked him. He learned to laugh then, not because life was funny, but because laughter was survival. And now, decades later, when he makes jokes about his hair dye or losing his touch, that boy is still speaking, protecting him with humor, even as the man longs to confess the pain behind it. Then comes the memory of the doctor, Dr. Doug Ross of ER. In the 1990s, Clooney was the heartbeat of primetime television, the rebel physician who made women swoon and men envious. To fans, he seemed invincible, but in private he was terrified of being trapped, of becoming nothing more than a pretty face on a weekly drama. Today, at 64, he wonders if those fears were misplaced, if he should have savored the simplicity of being adored rather than chasing something deeper. The memory of that stethoscope still hangs heavy, a symbol of both his breakthrough and his restlessness. And then, the director. Good night and good luck. Clooney remembers the pride of sitting behind the camera, shaping a story that mattered, defying Hollywood's expectations. Critics called it brave, visionary, even historic. Yet now, as he plays Murrow on Broadway, the line between past and present blurs. Is he still the daring artist who once challenged the system, or is he merely revisiting old glories, trying to prove to himself and the world that he can still carry the weight of history on his shoulders? The boy, the doctor, the director, they are all pieces of him, stitched into the man he is today. And as Clooney moves deeper into his 60s, these echoes are not comforts. They are reminders that time has passed, that roles are finite, that even icons cannot escape the shadows of what they once were. Each flashback is a haunting, not of failures, but of moments that can never be lived again. And it is in that haunting where the tragedy of George Clooney truly lies. Climax. The closing night, the spotlight fades. It is the final night of Good Night and Good Luck on Broadway. The theater is full, the anticipation electric, the audience waiting for George Clooney to step into the light one last time. He walks onto the stage, sharp in Murrow's dark suit, hair dyed to erase the years, his voice steady but lined with experience. For 2 hours, he commands the room, inhabiting the fearless journalist who once stood against a nation's paranoia. The crowd rises in ovation. Applause roars like a wave, crashing against the walls, lifting Clooney high. To the audience, this is triumph, proof that George Clooney, even in his 60s, can still captivate, still reign as one of the greats. He bows, smiles, and waves, the consummate professional delivering what they came to see. But when the curtain falls, when the theater empties and the echo of applause fades into silence, he is left alone in the dressing room. The suit hangs on the chair, the stage makeup smudges as he wipes his face, and in the mirror, the man staring back at him is not Edward R. Murrow, not Hollywood's most dashing leading man, not even the charming heartthrob of ER. It is George Clooney, 64, mortal, fragile, human. The dye in his hair feels like a costume. The applause feels distant. The silence feels heavy. And for the first time in years, he allows himself to feel it. The ache of time, the fear of irrelevance, the quiet knowledge that no amount of charm or accolades can hold back the tide. He sits there for a long moment, the ghost of a smile crossing his face, a smile that is equal parts gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the journey, grief for the fleetingness of it all. He knows he has lived a life most could only dream of, and yet the tragedy of George Clooney at 64 is not that he has lost anything, but that he finally understands what cannot be kept. The spotlight has faded, and in the hush that follows, George Clooney is simply a man, no longer immortal but achingly, heartbreakingly human. Legacy etched in silence. In the quiet hours of dawn, Long after the theaters close and the city sleeps, George Clooney sometimes walks the empty stage. No cameras, no audience, just the ghost of applause lingering in the velvet air. He stands there, his hair catching the dim light, the lines on his face carved deeper than ever, and he feels the weight of time pressing against him. He has lived a life of extraordinary richness. He has known the thrill of fame, the honor of awards, the warmth of family, the power of love. He has used his voice for causes greater than himself, and he has left his mark on both cinema and conscience. And yet, in the solitude of 64, he understands what all legends eventually learn, that legacy is not written in the glow of premieres or the roar of ovations. It is written in the silences, in the moments no one else sees. The boy with half a paralyzed face, the doctor who made America fall in love, the director who dared to challenge the world, the man who dyed his hair for Broadway and laughed at himself even as his heart ached. All of them live inside him, fragments of a life both dazzling and difficult. The tragedy of George Clooney is not scandal or downfall, not the loss of wealth or status. It is the tragedy of time, relentless, unstoppable, unyielding. It is the heartbreak of a man who gave the world so much light, now facing the slow dimming of his own. And yet, there is a strange beauty in this tragedy, for in his vulnerability, Clooney has revealed what made him beloved from the beginning, his humanity. He has shown us that even the brightest stars must one day confront the dark. One day, the stage will be empty, the lights will dim, the applause will fade forever, but the echo of George Clooney, the charm, the courage, the wit, and yes, even the heartbreak will remain. A legacy not in perfection, but in being utterly, achingly human. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.